Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another in our series of Public Quran campaign videos. So we're interviewing Yvonne Ridley about her choice of verse for today. We have a series now we're doing for Ramadan, and this is the first of the videos, inshallah, called My Ayah for Today. Dr. Yvonne Ridley, welcome.
Salam alaikum.
Okay. Right. Dr. Yvonne Ridley is a British journalist who was captured by the Taliban in 2001 and wrote a book about her experience. She later converted to Islam. She worked as a senior editor for the launch of the Al Jazeera online English site in Qatar before returning to the UK to play central roles in the Islam Channel and Press TV. She was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 2019 for humanitarian work involving Syrian women prisoners and helping Rohingya refugees compile evidence of war crimes. She is about to stand in a local election in Jedburgh in Scotland in May, which you can tell us a bit more about maybe towards the end. But she's here to talk about her chosen verses for today, and she has a few verses from Surah Al Kahf. So I'll hand over to you, and we can talk about them after you've had your say about these verses.
Yes, well, the ayats that were of particular interest to me were from 22. Yes, from 17 to right. The ayats that drew my attention were from 17 to 25, and this was about the people who were shielded by Allah in the cave and slept for 300 years. Now, the reason why this particular section of the Holy Quran caught my attention, I had been doing some research because I have got a little dog called Bertie, and his presence in my home has drawn all sorts of comments from Muslims, many who believe that dogs are haram, through to others who say that it's okay to have dogs. And it's quite a heated discussion in some sections of the Muslim community. So knowing that all answers to questions are in the Quran, I started looking for any references to dogs, and they're in Surah Al Kahf are the references to these people who sought shelter and refuge and were hidden by the angels in a cave, and they slept for 300 years, and among them was a dog. And so I thought, you know, I knew there would be an answer to my question somewhere in the Quran, and I found it here. And I have said, if dogs were unclean, the dog would have been removed, or it wouldn't have been allowed into the cave. It would have been taken out and forgotten about. But no, the dog was very much part of this group of people who needed refuge. And in fact, I think the dog slept at the entrance, almost guarding the people who were being protected. So that has now become my favorite passage.
Oh, very nice. Yes, I know the passage, but I mean that section of it. Well, I mean, it's a very well-known story, and for those who are not familiar with it, they can check it out yourself. But it's they were, you know, kind of in an environment where they were persecuted for believing in one God, and maybe like a sort of pre-Islam Mecca, so Jahiliyyah, we talk about something like this. And they went to find a place to escape, and they thought they had slept a night or a couple of nights or whatever it might be, just a number of hours. And then they woke up, and 300 years had passed. And it's interesting, actually, it says some, I think in the verse it says some add 9 more, which this is an interesting thing as to why that is. And I get into that. I find that interesting. So how long is a year? Well, there are 2 types of year. There's a solar year and there's also a lunar year. And it turns out that if you add 9 years and have 309 lunar years, it's exactly, well, pretty much exactly 300 solar years. So that's why there's a difference there, depending on how you calculate what a year is. And it's one of the actually many miracles in the Quran, about not miracles but evidences. We say ayah is an evidence. It's a sign, like it's a clue, a piece of evidence that itself could be huge, hugely significant. One tiny little shred of evidence, like you find an evidence to support your position that there's no problem with dogs. That's a proof. It's a proof. It's a little proof, and things like this in the Quran. I've looked at lots, very interesting proofs. But anyway, yes, in terms of dogs, yes, that principle there that the dogs have useful function as guards, and they're part of they form part of the group and protect the group, and are valuable contributors to the sort of home. In this case, they're home for 300 years. There's lots of things to think about that. I know that from that point of view, it's quite nice to see these little, you find these proofs in the Quran. And the Quran has, as you say, has something to say about everything. And even if it doesn't say something about that, it's probably, we can infer something, because the Quran says it does have answers for everything. So maybe it doesn't say anything about, I don't know, transgender issues or something. but maybe it does. I haven't really thought about it. But the point is, if it doesn't, that means it's not a subject that matters so much. A lot of people talk about things and get very hot under the collar about things that there's no mention of it being a bad thing in the Quran. And it's so, if it's not that important that the entire Quran hasn't mentioned this particular subject once, like, I don't know, growing a beard or keeping your trousers at a certain length or whatever it might be, it's probably not that important. So yeah, it's useful. I quite like that as an indicator of how we can go to the Quran and find answers about things. And even if you don't find an answer, it's probably that, in the sense of that the Quran doesn't talk about that, it's probably because it's not that important.
I think the beauty about this hidden gem, well, it's not that hidden because so many people read that surah every Friday.
Yes.
But the beauty about that is it doesn't say you can have dogs, you can't have dogs. It tells a story and makes you think and reflect upon the contents and then draw your own conclusion. And that is one of the beauties of the Quran. It's not a list of do's and don'ts. It's much more important than that, and it's such a wonderful guide. Mm-hmm. And all you have to do to read it is apply common sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so, I think some comment I saw somewhere on Facebook quite recently about, if the Quran says it's haram, then it's haram, kind of thing. It's like, well, I can't think of any place in the Quran where it says this is forbidden, or maybe about, the only thing I think perhaps is like talking about food specifically. It's forbidden to eat, carrion and sort of dead animals that die from natural causes, or pigs. I think other than that, this is a very symbolic kind of clear kind of line. But mostly, as the Quran itself describes itself, Allah describes it, the book of guidance. And guidance is to say, this way is better than that way. It's not to say, don't ever do this or don't ever do that, but this is better than that way. In most cases, I mean, there are clear things which are there, but it's not a book of halal and haram. And in that sense, and I think even that the words halal and haram, people don't really know what they mean. It's big terminology that it's helpful, but it's also unhelpful, because not saying things aren't halal or haram, but it just means yes or no, black and white. It's all, like that, which is often quite misleading. So people will say this meat is not halal. Well, what does it mean? Oh, it's chicken. Well, chicken's halal. How can chicken not be halal? Like, well, because Allah says it's, it describes the rules of halal and haram in the Quran. You can't say that chicken per se is haram. No, it's not. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was meeting people who were not Muslims, and he just say Bismillah and you can eat it. It's meat that's not haram. It may not be the perfect way it was killed or whatever, but as long as it wasn't dedicated to some idol or something, then it's if you say Bismillah, it's not prohibited. So people make life very difficult sometimes by declaring things haram that really aren't, and vice versa. And that I think that if you actually dig down into how people define these things, very few people necessarily understand it. But there's a criteria. They have these 5 categories, and the basic, and it's a bit vague as to how you infer it. But a haram thing is something whereby there is an indication, not necessarily proof, that there's a punishment if you do it, and there's a reward if you avoid it. And then it goes from there to disliked is there's not evidence to be punished if you do it, but there is evidence of reward if you avoid it. So this is guidance of there's bad consequences. Haram is bad for you. It's going to have a bad consequence for you. And makruh is it might have a bad consequence for you. Maybe, maybe not. But if you avoid it, it's good. It's good to avoid. And then you go from in the big category in the middle of permitted, mubah. It's like it's there's no evidence that it's going to harm you or going to be good for you. And then you've got the recommended, where there's evidence it's good for you, that Allah will reward you if you do it, and no evidence that Allah will punish you if you avoid it. And then eventually you get to the fard, the obligation, which is that there's evidence that if you don't do it, there's a punishment, there's a threat of a punishment, and there's evidence of reward if you do it. So this is all about when you translate halal and haram back into the original idea of guidance. Is there reward, or is there a risk of reward or a risk of punishment for doing things? And that's mostly the Quran is about guiding you as to which way lies reward and which way lies danger and risk. And risk is not necessarily risk, the danger. The two things are not necessarily. But it's about seeking safe and good and avoiding danger and bad, and that if you frame things like that, people understand. If you just tell them haram, halal, and people think, well, I don't understand why that's haram. I think it's good for me. But you have to explain the danger of it and show people the benefits of avoiding it, or vice versa. And I think we need to get back to that kind of Quranic concept, a bit away from the legalistic kind of black and white. It's not that the rules are wrong, it's just that it's not a good way to explain things.
No. It's also very unattractive, and I have to say, the people who come out with lists, or I'll call them the listers, it's haram, it's bid'ah, it's this. It makes Islam seem so unwelcoming and so unattractive. And so, I think that brothers and sisters should be very careful when they roll out the rules, because, you said it yourself, the Quran is a book of wisdom, of advice. It's not put down in black and white. We're guided and we're led. And it's up to us to use the brains that Allah gave us to reach our conclusions. And as you say, there's very little in the Quran proportionally that is instruction. Yeah. It's more guidance. And that's the beauty of the Quran. Islam is such an easy religion to follow. it does require discipline, and I would, having been a Christian, a practicing Christian, I would say there is more discipline to follow in Islam, but the beauty of the Quran is there for all to see as a book of guidance and not a whole list of things that you can't do. In fact, I often say Islam is more about what we can do than what we can't.
Yes, I think we tend to make life difficult. I remember I have my ayah for today. Not, I don't want to talk about a particular one, but the subject of this. There's a verse in the Quran which says that there's a couple of verses that refer to this. One is about don't ask too many questions while this is being revealed, because you just make your life difficult for yourself. It's a paraphrase. I can maybe find a reference to it, but this causes a number of problems with people who are what you call the list people. It's like, well, I think there should be an answer to absolutely everything as a simple like, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, if it says don't ask too many questions, it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, if the Quran is giving an instruction, and it's like the story of the cow, Surah Al Baqarah. So it says sacrifice a cow. Now, for them to sacrifice a cow, why are we doing that? Well, we just made an idol of a cow. So this says, no, the cow is not just another creature. A simple idea, go and find a nice cow and sacrifice cow. No, but they had to say, oh, but which cow, but which type of cow, or what color of cow, and they made their life, because they are procrastinating and trying to avoid it and hoping that the person would change their mind and say you don't need to do it. All these sorts of things come in, and you end up making your life actually more difficult because the rules got stricter just because they were unwilling to follow them. So if you want the best guidance, you could just work it out for yourself, because in really, I mean, think about it in that particular example. If you're idolizing a cow, you know, like the cow is like the most perfect creature and whatever, to find the most perfect one and sacrifice that one. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to work it out, does it? I mean, but they don't want to do that. They want to find if they can get away with the slightly lesser cow, so they keep the the nice cow for themselves and not sacrifice it, trying to reduce their obligations. And in the end of it, it said, no, you really need to sacrifice the best one. Get the idea in your head. But if they were sincere, they would have immediately thought, yes, I need to sacrifice the best cow I can find, the most perfect cow I can find. And then that will show that we don't elevate this to an idol. And if we just take the simple idea of what we need to be doing is trying to do the best we can, not the least we can, then it's easy. And that's the guidance. Allah wants us to try and rewards us for our trying. If he has to push you to every little level of advancement in your actions, then what's the value in your action? How virtuous is it when you really have no choice as to what actions you do, because you've been told you have to do this and you have to do that, and look, that's not enough. Come on, you can do that. Come on, you can do that. Come on, and then really, you're so kind of failing when you're having to be nudged on like that.
I'm so pleased you mentioned that, because I remember, I'm now living on a farm in the Scottish borders, and when we had our first Eid, I bought my husband a sheep to slaughter as a gift, and he was looking at it in the field and he said, "Is it a ewe or is it a ram?" And I said, "Oh, it's a ram." And he was looking again and he said, "I don't think it is." And I realized what he was talking about. And I said, "Oh, it's not intact." I said, "It has been gelded," or whatever the sheep equivalent is to that. And he said, "Well, I can't slaughter that." He said, it's not intact. It wouldn't be right to do that. And I wasn't sure about that, just that I'd gone out and I'd bought him a sheep that I thought, looked good. Obviously, I didn't look closely enough. And I thought that, that would have been fine. But, this idea that I thought that it's a sheep. Isn't that what is needed?
Yeah, well, I say this sort of thing. I don't know. I don't think that's. I think that's a bit, again, someone made rules. You just say, okay, that's good enough for me. I wouldn't have made a fuss about it, but he's obviously been told by somebody that that's not good enough. I don't think so. I think that the only thing I can think of that has any relevance to come back to the Quran about this is that there is a verse in the Quran about how some animals are deliberately harmed in the form of they would cut in the ears, make shapes, and various ways. And that this is for superstitious reasons. I think that they may have found. I think a lot of things start off with kind of sensible reasons, but then people carry on doing them without knowing why they're doing them, and it becomes a superstition. A tradition can easily become a superstition without people reviewing why it's happening. So you might have had like someone sort of maybe marking a small nick in a sheep's ear to show which sheep are his sheep, as a way of late, like you do like branding or something. Then people just started doing it, and they did more of it, and they started doing it, and in a way of actually starting to harm the animals and so on. And so I think there is an idea that you shouldn't harm creatures unnecessarily. So that I think is an idea which I would, obviously this is the Quranic idea of avoiding kind of superstitious practices, and especially cruelty to animals in any way. And it's mentioned in the Quran. This is a verse, I'm pretty sure it's a verse in the Quran about this. I have to dig them up, just at the back of my mind from many times I've read it. That's as I say, I don't know what ruling he's going on there. I think that's probably fairly normal for animals to be castrated at a certain age because they're intended for meat supply. I think it's pretty standard, because it's also just about kind of controlling the animals. I don't know if I don't necessarily, I find it very, I don't know, I find these things rather extreme measures. I remember talking about my cat. Well, we had our cat neutered. He's actually just sitting next to me. And I called it feline genital mutilation. So that's the new meaning of feline genital mutilation. It's not right. But there are other considerations, I guess. I haven't looked into it as a big issue myself. I don't. As long as there's a good purpose for it, and not harming the animal, in a
well,
way
I'm sure that we've started
cruel.
a debate somewhere, and which is good, because it means that people will be talking about this and looking into the Quran for answers, just as I did when I got my little dog Bertie, who was barking before. So apologies.
Well, I think it's quite interesting how the differences that we were in Turkey for holiday a few years ago now because of COVID, but it was the dogs that kind of roam on the streets, but they're kind of looked after as well. So they all have like registration tags, and they all have, and people provide food with like the restaurants and little bottles, little bowls of water kind of all over the place for dogs to drink. It's built into the city's kind of infrastructure. And they have, in a sense, a far more natural life because they have a community of other dogs. It's not like you're on your own. We tend to take dogs and they become part of our families. But because they're on their own, a lot of the time, well, not always. My grandmother had 6 dogs in the house. It was very much a community. But it's this idea of the sort of the natural community of animals, I think, is quite an important one. They want to be part of communities, and they want to. And they kind of become part of our household communities, but they need to go out into the woods and smell the other dogs and meet the other dogs on walks and things like that. And it's you have to think of the needs. We have 2 cats, and they get on quite well, and I think that their life is a lot richer for having each other in the house, because there's a sense of you're less lonely as a cat. I mean, they fight each other all the time, but it's a play fights, and you get there. I think it's quite important to have a good sense of that animals have always been part of human life and always can be part of human life. We have to concern ourselves with cleanliness. You know, sometimes animals do make messes, and we need to tidy up, and we need to tidy up after them and make sure. And I remember my grandmother's house when she had a very poorly dog, and it was hard to keep clean. And so you need to maybe, the only thing I would say about keeping a dog, I remember discussing that with my grandparents about this, is you need to at least keep a place clean for prayer. And as long as you've got a place clean for prayer and you can make sure you're clean for prayer, then that's fine as far as I know. But
yes,
anyway, really, that's the things that people can comment in YouTube. I will I think allow comments, but that's another issue. We may have abusive comments, so I don't necessarily always allow them. We'll see. Anyway, thanks. I think that's very good. Any other thoughts you want to share about that?
No, just, thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss this. And I will look forward to the YouTube comments because, although there is some intolerance out there, there are also gems to be picked up from brothers and sisters who share their knowledge. And, that is another beautiful side to Islam as well. So I look forward to it.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I hope Bertie has a long and healthy life, and
Inshallah,
protects you from all those people coming up the driveway who needs to bark. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.